The neon red numbers on my digital alarm clock blinked 3:17 a.m., staring at me like a pair of demonic eyes in the darkness of my bedroom. The room should have been a sanctuary of silence and rest. Instead, it felt like the inside of a kick drum. The walls weren't just walls anymore. They were vibrating membranes, pulsing violently in time with a bass beat that felt less like music and more like a physical assault on my internal organs. It was a Tuesday night, which meant the world should have been asleep. But for me, sleep was a distant, fatting memory. I had a grueling 12-hour shift in the pediatric ER starting at exactly 6:00 a.m. In less than 3 hours, I was expected to calculate precise medication dosages, insert IV lines into tiny veins, and make life-or-death decisions for sick children. I needed to be sharp. I needed to be alert. Instead, I was buried under 2 thick pillows, sobbing into the mattress from sheer, crushing exhaustion. My neighbor, Bram, had moved in 2 months ago, and since that day my life had become a sleepless hell. The bass was so deep it rattled the perfume bottles on my dresser, inching them toward the edge. It thumped in my chest, sinking with my heart rate until I felt like I was going into cardiac arrest. I grabbed my phone, the blue light stinging my tired, swollen eyes, and typed a text to Bram with trembling thumbs. "Please, I have to save sick kids in 3 hours. I haven't slept in days. Please turn it down." I stared at the phone's screen, my breath catching in my throat as I watched the 3 little gray dots dance. They appeared, disappeared, and appeared again, indicating he was typing a response. I held onto a shred of hope that maybe, just maybe, he would find a scrap of human decency and apologize. I prayed for a simple, "Sorry, turning it down now." A minute later, the phone buzzed in my hand. It wasn't a text message. It was a photo. I tapped the screen to open it and my stomach dropped. The image was blurry, taken in the low, purple LED light of his living room. It showed Bram and his girlfriend, Veda, sitting on their beige leather couch surrounded by a sea of red Solo cups. They were both grinning maniacally, their faces flushed with alcohol, holding up their middle fingers directly at the camera lens. Below the offensive photo was a caption that seared itself into my brain. "Buy earplugs, Grandma. It's a lifestyle. Middle finger." I stared at the phone, the glow illuminating the tears drying on my cheeks. The disrespect burned hotter than my exhaustion. It wasn't just the noise anymore. It was the malice. They knew I was suffering, they knew I was a nurse, and they found it funny. They thought my job, my sleep, and my sanity were a joke. I saved the photo to my gallery, my hand shaking not from fatigue, but from a cold, hard rage settling in my gut. I realized then that asking nicely was over. Civility had just left the building. The next day at the hospital was a waking nightmare. My head felt like it was stuffed with wet cotton wool, and my limbs felt heavy, as if I were moving through molasses. Every sound in the ER, the beeping cardiac monitors, the wailing of frightened bobbies, the squeak of rubber shoes on tile, sounded distant and distorted, like I was underwater. I was tending to a toddler with a severe respiratory infection, a sweet little boy struggling to breathe. I pulled the medication from the automated dispenser, my eyes struggling to focus on the small print of the label. I drew up the syringe, my hands trembling slightly. I was about to inject it into the child's IV port when a firm hand grabbed my wrist, stopping me inches from the catheter. It was my supervisor, her eyes wide with alarm. "Petra, stop." I looked down at the syringe in my hand. I had drawn up 4 milligrams instead of 0.4, a 10-fold overdose. It could have stopped the child's heart instantly. I dropped the syringe onto the tray, horror washing over me like a bucket of ice water. "You're shaky, Petra," my supervisor said, pulling me into the quiet of the hallway. Her face was stern but etched with concern. "Your eyes are bloodshot and you're moving like a zombie. You almost killed a patient." I haven't slept," I stammered, fighting the urge to vomit. "Go home," she ordered, her voice leaving no room for argument. "If this happens again, I have to report it. You'll be suspended pending an investigation. Do you understand?" I nodded, fighting back tears of shame. My livelihood was on the line because Bram wanted to play DJ. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, the engine idling, and called my landlord, Royston. I didn't just complain. I played him a recording I had taken from my bedroom the night before. I held the phone up to my car speakers so he could hear the relentless, rhythmic pounding of the bass. "Mr. Royston, I almost lost my job today," I said, my voice cracking with desperation. "They are violating the lease. The quiet hours are clearly stated from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. You have to evict them. This is unbearable." Royston sighed, a long, weary sound that told me he didn't care before he even spoke. "Look, Petra, I hear you, but you have to understand my position. Bram's father paid the rent for the entire year in advance, a full 12 months up front in cash. So, that gives them the right to torture me," I demanded, gripping the steering wheel. "It makes it complicated," Royston said dismissively. "Eviction is a long, expensive legal process. Unless they burn the place down or stop paying, which they won't because it's prepaid, my hands are tied. Just try to get along. Maybe buy a white noise machine or some heavy curtains." He hung up before I could argue further. I stared at the phone, feeling completely abandoned. The system had failed me. The landlord had been bought off by Daddy's money, and I was left to rot in a vibrating box. That night, the music started earlier than usual, around 11:00 p.m. I didn't text Bram. I didn't knock on his door. I called the police. 2 officers arrived 40 minutes later. I watched through my peephole as they knocked on Bram's door. The music cut off abruptly. I heard Bram's charming, practiced voice through the wood. "Oh, sorry, officers. We didn't realize it was so loud. We were just watching a movie. We'll keep it down." The officers, satisfied with the warning, left. 10 minutes later, the music was back. But this time, it was louder. The bass was cranked up so high my teeth ached. And then came the banging. Bram was hitting our shared bedroom wall with something heavy, a hammer or a rubber mallet. Thud, thud, thud. It was a rhythmic taunt. "Snitches get stitches," he screamed through the drywall, his voice muffled but distinct. "Go ahead, call them again. We'll be quiet by the time they get here. You can't win, Grandma." He was right. By the time the police returned, the apartment would be silent again. I would look like the crazy, nagging neighbor wasting resources. I lay in bed, the hammer thuds echoing in my mind, and decided that if the law wouldn't help me, I would have to help myself. The next afternoon, I met my friend Calloway for coffee. I looked like a reanimated corpse. My skin was gray, my hair was a mess, and I had dark purple circles under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. Calloway, an audio engineer who spent his life building massive sound systems for concerts and festivals, listened to my rant without interrupting. He took a slow sip of his espresso and smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was a dangerous, calculating smile. "You know, Petra," he said, leaning in across the small table. "Bram and Vader are what, 21, 22. "Yeah, barely," I muttered, rubbing my temples. "Why does that matter?" "And you're 32. I'm 34, Calloway continued, his voice low. "We have old ears. They have young ears. As we age, we naturally lose the ability to hear very high frequencies. It's a biological process called presbycuses." "So," I asked, confused. "There's a specific frequency called the mosquito tone, around 17.4 kilohertz, Calloway explained, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Adults over 25 usually can't hear it at all, but to a 20-year-old, it sounds like a dentist drill boring directly into their brain. It is physically painful. It causes headaches, nausea, and anxiety." I sat up straighter, the fog in my brain clearing slightly. "Can we buy a device that makes that sound?" "We're not buying a little garden pest control device," Calloway said, pulling out his phone. "We are going to build a sonic cannon." Calloway took me shopping immediately. We didn't go to a regular electronics store like Best Buy. We went to a specialty audio warehouse in the industrial district that smelled like solder, ozone, and dust. With Calloway's expert guidance, I bought 2 massive, directional ultrasonic tweeters. These weren't the kind of speakers you have in your living room. These were industrial-grade components designed for testing acoustic limits in laboratories. We also bought a high-powered amplifier and a precision signal generator. The total cost was nearly $1,000, but I handed over my credit card without a second of hesitation. It was cheaper than moving and far more satisfying than earplugs. That evening, Calloway came over to help me set it up. We mounted the tweeters on my balcony, hidden behind some potted plants. My balcony was right next to Bram's sliding glass door, separated only by a flimsy partition. We aimed the speakers specifically at the gap where his door met the frame, the weak point in the soundproofing. It looked like military-grade weaponry. Calloway wired everything into the amp inside my living room, running the cables neatly under the rug. "This is directional," Calloway warned as he tightened the last screw. "It's like a laser beam of sound. It won't bother the neighbors upstairs or downstairs, just him." It was 6:00 p.m. I could hear the faint thumping of bass starting next door. Bram was warming up his speakers for another night of torment. I felt a surge of adrenaline. "Ready?" Calloway asked, his hand resting on the dial of the signal generator. "Do it," I said, my heart pounding. Calloway flipped the power switch. The lights on the amp glowed blue. He turned the frequency knob to exactly 17.4 kHz. Then, he slowly turned the volume dial on the amp all the way to the maximum setting. I stood there in the middle of my living room, waiting. I listened intently. I heard absolutely nothing. The room was perfectly silent. I looked at Calloway, panic rising in my chest. "Is it working? I don't hear anything. Did we waste the money? Is it broken?" Calloway pointed to the professional decibel meter he was holding. The needle was buried in the red zone. "Oh, it's working, Petra. It is screaming at 100 decibels. That is the volume of a chainsaw. If you were 20 years old, you'd be on the floor clutching your head right now, screaming for mercy." It was the perfect stealth weapon. Silence to me, agony to them. We went out to the balcony and stood quietly, sipping hot tea in the cool evening air. Through the thin walls and the glass door, the music next door was thumping, some repetitive, aggressive techno track that usually drove me insane. Suddenly, the music cut out. It didn't fade, it stopped dead. I heard Bram's voice, loud and agitated, drifting through the partition. "Veda, turn off the kettle. What is that screeching?" I held my breath, a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth for the first time in weeks. Veda's voice floated back, sounding shrill and annoyed. "I didn't turn anything on. I'm not even in the kitchen. Oh my God, what is that sound? My ears are ringing." "It's like a high-pitched squeal," Bram yelled. "Is it the speakers? Did I blow a tweeter? It hurts." I heard the sound of equipment being unplugged and plugged back in. Cables were being ripped out, but the high-pitched whine, invisible to me, was relentless. They couldn't turn it off because it wasn't coming from their apartment. I looked at Calloway. He clinked his mug against mine. "Cheers," he whispered. That night, Bram had invited a group of friends over. I could hear the laughter and the heavy stomping of feet around 9:00 p.m. I walked over to my rig, which sat innocently on a side table, and flipped the switch. I sat back on my couch and opened a book. The silence in my apartment was blissful. I turned a page, savoring the peace. Next door, absolute chaos was brewing. Within 15 minutes, the music stopped completely. I pressed my ear to the shared wall to listen to the fallout. "Dude, the vibe in here is weird," a male voice complained loud enough for me to hear. "My head hurts. It's like intense pressure behind my eyes." "Is there a gas leak?" a girl asked, her voice trembling. "I feel nauseous. My teeth hurt. I need to get out of here." "It's so sharp," another voice whined. "Bram, do you have a dog whistle or something? It's piercing." "I don't hear it as bad as you guys," Bram shouted, sounding frustrated and confused. "Just ignore it, have another drink." But they couldn't ignore it. It was biological. It was primal. By 11:00 p.m., the last guest had slammed the door and left. The apartment next door was dead silent. I turned off my machine, went to bed, and slept like a baby for the first time in 2 months. The next morning, I saw Bram in the hallway as I was leaving for my shift. He looked terrible. He was rubbing his temples vigorously, and his eyes were squinting as if the hallway lights were too bright. "Hey," he said aggressively, stepping in front of me to block my path to the elevator. "Do you hear a high-pitched noise, like a screeching sound?" I stopped and widened my eyes, putting on my best innocent nurse face. I adjusted my tote bag. No, it's so quiet here. I actually slept great last night. Why? He glared at me, searching my face for a lie. It started right when we started the music, a piercing noise. It drove everyone away. I tilted my head, feigning professional concern. You know, Bram, loud music can cause tinnitus. It's a permanent ringing in the ears. Maybe you damaged your hearing from all those late nights. You really should see a doctor. Hearing loss is permanent, and it starts just like that. He looked shaken for a split second, doubt creeping into his bloodshot eyes. Then he scowled, muttered a curse word, and stormed off toward the stairs. Bram didn't buy the tinnitus theory for long. His ego wouldn't let him believe he was damaged. He decided it was the building. He was convinced it was a water pipe or a faulty electrical wire in the walls. I heard him on the phone later that day, screaming at Royston. It's unlivable. It sounds like a jet engine inside my skull. You need to fix it right now. Royston, tired of the drama but worried about the prepaid rent, sent a plumber. I watched from my peephole as the plumber arrived with his heavy tool belt. He spent an hour in Bram's apartment. I made sure to turn the device off completely while the plumber was there. The plumber, a burly man in his 50s, obviously couldn't hear the frequency even if I had left it on. But since it was off, Bram looked completely insane. There's no noise, kid, the plumber said loudly as he walked out into the hall, wiping his hands on a rag. Pipes are fine. That'll be $300 for the emergency call-out. Bram was furious. He was standing in the doorway, red-faced, out of pocket, and the problem was unresolved. I realized that if I left the device on constantly, they might eventually get used to it, or their brains would tune it out like background static. I needed to make it worse. I needed to condition them. I connected the power supply of my amplifier to a remote control switch that I kept in my pocket. I started a strict Pavlovian training regimen. If they were quiet, I left the device off. Peace reigned in the hallway. But the literal second, I heard a bass drop or a loud shout, I hit the button in my pocket. Blast. If they turned the music down, I turned the device off. Relief. If they turned it back up, I hit the button again. Pain. I was training them like dogs. Bass equaled pain. Silence equaled relief. It was psychological warfare, and for the first time in months, I was the one holding the leash. A week later, Bram tried to escalate his career. He invited a VIP guest over, a famous local DJ named Z-Spin who could supposedly get him gigs at the big clubs downtown. This was Bram's big break. I waited until I heard them talking about mixing tracks. I heard the expensive equipment being set up, the thud of heavy speakers being moved. Check this transition, Bram said, his voice full of pride. It's fire. I hit the button, but this time Calloway had told me to pulse it manually. On, off, on, off. I heard the VIP guest yell out in pain instantly. Ah, what the hell is that? It's just the pipes, Bram pleaded, desperation in his voice. Ignore it, it stops sometimes. Bro, that's not pipes, the DJ said, his voice angry. That's your equipment. It's got a grounding loop whine or something. It's trashing my ears. I can't work like this. My hearing is my money, man. I heard the sound of gear being packed up hurriedly. I'm out, the DJ said. Fix your rig before you call me again. This is amateur hour. The door slammed. Bram's networking opportunity was ruined. Bram finally snapped. He called the police on me. He must have Googled high-pitched noise neighbors and figured it out. Officer Grady arrived at my door an hour later. He was a heavy-set man, clearly over 50, looking tired of the noise complaints from our floor. He looked at me with weary eyes. Ma'am, your neighbor claims you are attacking him with sound waves, Grady said, looking at his notepad like it was the stupidest thing he'd ever read. Sound waves? I asked, looking confused and slightly offended. Officer, I'm a nurse. I just want to sleep. I don't even own a stereo. Come with me, Grady said. We went to Bram's apartment. I had left the device on full blast. We stood in Bram's living room. Bram was covering his ears, his face red and sweaty. "Can't you hear that?" he screamed. "It's piercing, it's right here, it's like a knife." Officer Grady stood in the middle of the room. The room was silent to him. It was silent to me. "Son," Grady said, his voice stern, "I don't hear a thing, it is dead quiet in here." "It's her," Bram pointed a shaking finger at me. "She's doing it." Grady looked at Bram's dilated pupils from stress and his manic behavior. "I think you need to sleep it off, son. Stop calling us for imaginary noises, or I'll write you up for wasting police time." Grady left, writing Bram off as a drug-addled nuisance. Bram and Veda realized the police wouldn't help. They couldn't prove anything, so they tried to adapt. They bought expensive, industrial-grade noise-canceling headphones, the kind construction workers use. For a few days, I didn't hear much from them. I saw them through the gap in the curtains when I watered my plants. They were walking around their own apartment wearing bulky, ugly gray headsets. They looked ridiculous. They watched TV with headphones. They ate dinner with headphones. They couldn't talk to each other without taking them off, and the moment they did, the screeching hit them. They were prisoners in their own home. Their relationship began to crumble. It's hard to be a romantic, fun couple when you have to wear safety gear just to sit on your own sofa. I could hear them shouting at each other, the stress boiling over. One evening, I met Veda in the elevator. She looked awful. She had lost at least 10 pounds, and her skin was pale and pasty. She wasn't holding a red Solo cup or giving the finger anymore. She looked like a ghost haunting the building. "Bram is going crazy," Veda whispered to me, not making eye contact, staring at the floor numbers. "He's tearing the drywall apart looking for hidden speakers. He barely sleeps. I can't live like this." For a second, I felt a twinge of sympathy. I was a nurse. My instinct was to heal, not to harm. I looked at her tired eyes and almost thought about turning the machine off for a night, just to give her a break. But then, the image of that text message flashed in my mind. "Buy earplugs, Grandma." They hadn't cared when I was almost fired. They hadn't cared when I was shaking from exhaustion. They hadn't shown me an ounce of mercy. "That sounds terrible," I said coldly as the doors opened. "Maybe you guys should move." Bram wasn't dumb. He was just arrogant. He went online and bought a frequency detector, a handheld device used by electricians to find faults. I was in my kitchen making coffee when I heard him screaming on the balcony. I knew it, I told you." He was standing on his balcony, pointing the orange device at our shared partition. The device was lit up red, beeping wildly. He had found the source. He had proof. He ran to the hallway and started banging on my front door, kicking it with his heavy boots. "I know you have it. Open up. I have proof. I'm going to smash it." He was unhinged. The lack of sleep and the constant noise had broken him. I didn't open the door. I locked the deadbolt and called Royston immediately. "Mr. Royston," I said calmly, "Bram is currently kicking my door in. I believe he is having a psychotic break. If you don't come now, I'm calling the SWAT team." Royston arrived 20 minutes later. He lived nearby, and the threat of property damage moved him faster than noise complaints ever did. He walked onto the landing just as Bram was taking a baseball bat to my door frame, screaming about sonic rays and invisible lasers. "Bram!" Royston shouted, his voice echoing in the stairwell. Bram spun around, the bat in his hand, looking wild. "She has a machine. Look at the detector. It beeps." Royston looked at the bat. He looked at the deep gouges in my door. He looked at Bram's wild, manic eyes. To Royston, the detector meant nothing. He couldn't hear the noise. All he saw was a violent tenant destroying his hallway with a weapon. "Put the bat down," Royston said, his voice low and dangerous. "You are scaring the tenants. You are damaging the property. I don't care about your prepaid rent anymore. One more incident, one more, and I will file for an emergency eviction order based on safety threats. Do you understand me?" Bram lowered the bat, panting heavily. He looked at my closed door with pure, unadulterated hatred. Bram decided to go nuclear. He couldn't play loud music, and he couldn't attack me physically without getting evicted. So he planned a silent disco. It was a clever loophole. He invited 50 people. They would all wear wireless headphones listening to the DJ. There would be no music noise for me to record. No lease violation for loud music. But 50 people jumping and dancing in a small apartment creates a lot of noise. The thumping of feet would be unbearable. It would be like living under a stampede. He posted the invite on his public Instagram. Anti-Karen rave. Invite only. The neighbors can't complain if they can't hear the music. Let's rage. 10 p.m. He wanted to swarm me. He wanted to break me with sheer foot traffic. I called Calloway immediately. He's having a party, 50 people, tonight. Calloway came over with his toolbox within the hour. A silent disco, that's actually kind of smart, but cute. He hooked his laptop up to the amplifier. We need to change the strategy. Constant tone is annoying, but they can wear headphones. If we want to clear a room, we need the pulse protocol. What's that? I asked, watching him type code. I'm setting the speakers to emit a burst of 18.5 kilohertz every 30 seconds, Calloway explained, his fingers flying across the keyboard. But I'm adding a subsonic variance. It messes with the inner ear fluids. It's designed to induce anxiety, nausea, and a sense of impending doom. It's not just pain anymore, it's motion sickness without the motion. Is it safe? I asked, hesitating. It's just sound, Petra, he grinned. They'll just feel like they drank bad tequila. It clears a room faster than a tear gas canister. The silent disco began at 10:00 p.m. I watched from my peephole as hipsters with glitter on their faces filed into Bram's apartment. They were handed wireless headphones at the door. Soon, the thumping began. It sounded like a herd of elephants was doing aerobics next door. The floor shook. My ceiling fan rattled. I could hear the muffled shouts of people singing along to music I couldn't hear. I walked to my rig. Goodbye, party, I whispered. I initiated the pulse protocol. I sat on my couch and waited. Every 30 seconds, the red light on the amp blinked, sending a silent, nauseating blast through the wall. It happened slowly at first. Through the wall, the rhythmic thumping of feet started to get messy. It lost its beat. The shouting turned into murmuring. Then I heard the sliding glass door open. People were stepping out onto the balcony for air. I don't feel good, I heard a girl say clearly. I feel like the room is spinning. I need to sit down. Me too, a guy replied, sounding slurry. I think the punch was spiked. I feel super anxious all of a sudden. My stomach is rolling. Inside the apartment, the vibe shifted from euphoric to chaotic. The high-frequency pulses were messing with their equilibrium. I heard a crash. Someone had fallen over. Then the unmistakable sound of retching. Someone had thrown up. This place is cursed, man, someone yelled. I'm getting out of here. The exodus began. It wasn't a party anymore. It was a panic. People were ripping off their headphones and rushing for the door, desperate to escape the invisible pressure that was crushing their skulls and churning their stomachs. In the chaos of the fleeing guests, someone propped the fire exit stairwell door open to get out faster. This triggered the building's silent alarm. The police arrived, not because I called them, but because the alarm company did. When the officers entered Bram's apartment to check the fire, they didn't find flames. They found chaos, vomit on the rug, broken furniture from people falling over. And because the guests had panicked and fled, they had dropped things. Several small baggies of white powder were scattered on the coffee table, left behind in the rush. Officer Grady was on duty again. He walked in and saw the drugs. He saw Bram, who was holding the baseball bat again, paranoid and screaming at his guests to stay. That's it, Grady said, pulling out his handcuffs. 3 days later, I stood on my balcony with a glass of chilled white wine. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. It was a beautiful evening. Below, in the parking lot, a U-Haul truck was idling. Bram and Veda were carrying boxes. They looked defeated. Royston had evicted them immediately for the drugs and the significant property damage Bram had caused to the walls while hunting for my device. They had lost their prepaid rent and their deposit. Bram stopped as he lifted a heavy box of vinyl records. He looked up and saw me leaning on the railing. His eyes were dark with lack of sleep and defeat. "I know you did something," he yelled up at me, his voice hoarse. "I know it was you. You ruined everything." I looked down at him. I took a slow sip of my wine. I smiled, a genuine, rested smile that reached my eyes. "I'm sorry, Bram," I called down, my voice cheerful and bright. "I can't hear you, it's so peaceful up here." I turned around, walked back into my silent apartment, and closed the sliding door. The silence was heavy and sweet. I went to bed and slept for 12 hours straight.